Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual in Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all, welcome back to the podcast. Another just mind-blowing episode to share today with artist Leah Nguyen. She's a visual artist based in Seattle, Washington. Her work is deeply spiritual and deeply connected to a process that might be unfamiliar to a lot of people out there. She channels her work through her connection to various spirit guides that help her make decisions through her art making process to make these kind of soul patterns and healing patterns that she does. She talks a lot about how that process works, kind of really breaks it down and kind of grounds it a little bit for us, for people who might not be familiar with channeling and what that entails. And it's really, really fascinating stuff. And our conversation talked a lot about the work that she does around healing the land in various landscapes, but also the soul portrait she does for people, along with talking about sort of bigger ideas and spirituality and art. We really get deep into some philosophical notions related to duality, related to healing trauma, related to sort of like colonialist and patriarchal histories, just a lot of places that this conversation wove through. And it really tied all back together to this notion of community and connection, and sort of taking ownership over our own spiritual evolution so that we can all play a part in healing this planet. And so I think you're going to get a lot of inspiration from it, whether you're an artist or you're not an artist, or you don't identify as an artist. I think you're going to get a lot from it. I know I did. I think that she has a lot of amazing insights to share. And I'm still kind of reeling after our conversation, thinking about a lot of the little nuggets of wisdom and sort of thoughts that she brought that has gotten me really thinking. So I hope it gets you thinking too, and hopefully feeling as well. So without further ado, here's Leah Nguyen. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Leah. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Yeah, thanks
It's
for joining
really
me from Seattle early in the morning, but this
absolutely.
it's a great way to start our morning, being able to talk
Yeah.
about these things that we really both love. And one thing that really I connect so deeply with you on in terms of art making is this idea of how art can be a gateway for like cultivating, expressing, and transmitting like higher levels of consciousness or transcendence. And I have my own sort of experience in like how these qualities sort of play out, but I'm curious from your experience with the work that you do and the way you approach it, like what are your thoughts on that idea, and like how do you see it play out in your process as an artist?
Wow. Yeah, the so I work each of my paintings is made in collaboration with spirit. I
Hmm.
call it conscious collaboration with spirit because I never check out of, the like I'm not in a trance state or like my conscious mind is very much part of the conversation. So
Yeah.
um, I I really see that guidance as being incredibly actually practical and useful in my life, and useful in creating the patterns and creating patterns that fit an intention and a healing intention. So
Hmm.
I each of my paintings has a very specific intention, whether it's to embody the gifts of a soul or to heal intergenerational wounds, or to heal a place and to kind of release the human trauma or the things that have happened in that place, to heal the land. And so the intention um, is often about like gratitude and healing and like embodying the essence of a place. The
Hmm.
patterns end up then both helping being a healing tool, and then also um, basically being an energetic template to that like it tunes us, and it's
Yeah.
an energetic template that allows us to like that brings us into like like new possibilities and ways of being, right? So I see the patterns as being kind of midwives to this moment that we're in, where we, everything is changing, and all these layers of trauma and healing, like to be healed, are coming up through the earth, through our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And the patterns are really there to support that process, to make it, to ease it, and to make it, to allow us to go as deep as we can, to go as, connected up and down, and all that connection, and to support us in that network of love.
That's amazing. I mean, intention is like the key, right? Like because that kind of aligns your consciousness with like not necessarily like a full on outcome, but like a direction in which you want the energy that you're going to put into what you're doing to go toward. And I think about intention a lot, not even just as an artist, but in everything that like I'm doing, the decisions I'm making. And I think beginning your process with like an alignment with that intention is like so crucial. I'm curious, like, I love how you're saying like how it can apply to a sense of place. Cause I know you do a lot of different things, right? You're making your own paintings, for yourself. And then you're making these soul portraits for other people, but then you're also doing these murals, in these physical spaces on land, or even doing like cultivating like land installations to create healing in those spaces. And so I love like the diversity of like how you're approaching it. And this idea to me of like changing the trauma or the resonance of a certain place through like the intention of like these patterns and like these geometries, these creative outputs, to me make a lot of sense, because it's like encoded in the symmetry and in these patterns is a sense of harmony. And then that harmonic quality is going to filter the dissonance that might be in a certain person or a certain place. Do you ever see like an outcome, like when you do, let's say, one of these pieces, like in a physical place, like a location? Do you ever revisit that place, or ever heard like any sort of like anecdotal like thoughts from other people who go to those places where you've created these patterns and these sort of energy portals?
There's a part of me that's a researcher that wishes that I could, give you some hard data there.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'd say the thing that I notice is just a feeling sense, right? Like, when the patterns are installed, whether it's in an architectural space or on the land, there's something that deepens, right? Like
Hmm.
there's a quality of, there's that sort of rightness of just like where things are lined up, and it's not
Yeah.
like it's the only right alignment, but it's like there's been a deepening and a sinking in, and a widening of the resonance. uh,
Yeah.
and I think that, the way that I work, is, if you were to use the same process, you would find a completely different pattern or geometry or landscape. Like it would work with your, like any person. Even if a person did portraits, they could use the process, and they may not, they wouldn't come with like a pattern geometry like I do, because that's my soul's lens. So I think
Hmm.
anybody could use this process in a landscape to create something, and it would deepen the resonance in that
Yeah.
place, but it would look different, right? Because it would come through their soul's lens. um,
Definitely.
and so the collaborative team that I work with are beings of nature, are human souls, and then my soul always, I have sort of a core team of collaborators, and what working with beings of nature does is it allows you to create something in balance. there's
Hmm.
there's always going to be that balance. So, because nature's like evolutionary principle is balance, um, and humans evolutionary principle is free will. And so when we work together, when there's that collaboration between free will and balance, there's like beautiful things happen.
Yes.
Yeah, and so as the human in sort of that's calling to this team together, I'm sort of like the head of the team in that way. My intention guides it, and
Yeah.
like that's the free will piece, right? Like I decide what we're going to do, and then my team tells me how to do that thing in perfect balance.
Wow. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're tapping into these like sort of deeper levels of consciousness and creativity through your connection to, would you say like higher different intelligences or spirits, or like is it more intuitive, that's like you kind of get yourself in this intuitive space and it's more of like how you communicate through like intuition? Like I remember you told me a little bit about how you communicate with your like sort of team of collaborators. Could you maybe walk us through that? Because I found it very interesting, something I've never heard of, and fascinating to me. And I think it would be really cool for people to hear about this because it's probably something unlike they've ever heard before.
Yeah, I am. So I'm everybody has sort of their own strengths when it comes to extrasensory perception, right? I'm a kinesthetic person. That's like the first thing. So I feel energy, and I did training in energy psychology and Reiki and plant spirit medicine, but energy psychology is what taught me energy testing. So I use energy testing to have a dialogue, and I have a 300 plus question matrix that I use. So I
Wow.
ask yes, no questions to my team for every step of my paintings. So you were talking about transcendental connection to spirit. And yes, I like connect to spirit. Like my team I connect to them. I don't see them or hear them, but I feel them. And then,
Hmm.
so I ask to connect, I feel the connection, and then I ask them yes, no questions. So this looks like this. And it could be a number of ways. I'm testing an energy field. I'm testing
Yeah.
my energy field, and my energy field is connected to their energy fields. Everything has an energy field. So
Yes.
when I paint on a rock, I ask that rock's permission, and I'm connecting with that rock's energy field, and the rock gives me permission, or sometimes doesn't give me permission to paint on it.
Hmm.
So I've painted little rocks before, and like I'll pick them up and ask them, and they'll say yes or no whether they want to be
Wow.
painted. It's like either part of their mission or not part of their mission to be painted on, right?
Yeah.
Um, so um, so let me get back to energy testing. So I'm energy testing the field, and it's not like it's not about my muscles here. It's my muscles are, whether if they're connected into the field, then it's strong, and if they're not, it's just the strength of my muscles, right? So
Yeah.
this is a yes. That's when the extra energy is flowing through my fingers. I can't break through that loop no matter how hard I push on it. It's not
Wow.
about my muscles. And this is a no. I can't hold that loop no matter how hard I try, right?
Interesting.
So
Wow.
I ask a series of yes no questions about like everything from the density of the paint to the shape to the size to how it's filled. Really every aspect. And sometimes the question don't yield an answer. Like the answer is not on my list of 300, I have 300 plus questions. It's always evolving my question matrix. When a new one
Yeah.
comes, I'm like, I write it down because I'm like, oh, that's a
Wow.
good. But yeah, sometimes it's not on the list. So then I need to use my other deeper sort of extrasensory perception. I have to use intuition.
Hmm.
I use sort of meditative states and like inner vision. So I will sometimes see things. And sometimes even before I start energy testing, I'll see something and then I'll ask, like, is it this? And they're like, it's like almost, or like
Hmm.
the team helps me get the information in exactly the right timing so that my conscious mind can like put it together, if that makes
Wow.
sense. They're
No,
really good indicators.
it does make sense. I think for some people it might make more sense than others because of experience, right? Like when you have experience of like being in connection with like different kinds of energy, like you can feel sometimes the incredible power in them, but sometimes it can be very subtle as well. I think that's really interesting. How did you begin that process of collaboration? Like, how did you discover your connection to these different sort of collaborators in your creative process? Like, when did that part of your process begin?
It was a multi-step process
Yeah,
over
I
a
can
number.
imagine.
Yeah. So I started studying energy psychology. That's the foundation of it in 2001, and learned how to collaborate with my soul and with another person's soul to guide a healing process using energy testing. So we were navigating at the depth of the soul, like asking kind of like, what is the soul, what's the highest priority for this soul in order for this human to heal, right? Like the human had a healing intention. They came in with their intention. And then I was the guide and I asked, is this the most important thing for this person to work on, what they think they need to work on? Or is there something that's foundational to this that needs to be worked on? So already looking at those deeper levels and then working to transform trauma through subtle interventions. Sometimes it was drawing, sometimes it was singing, sometimes it was tapping on the ends of energy meridians. There was a whole, again, a matrix. So I had that my teacher, Andrew Hahn, who does guided self-healing, he had this question matrix. So that was already like established in my consciousness as a way of working, right? So studied that for I did 2 years and then, like another year of practice. So it was well established. I was using energy testing all the time to communicate at the soul level. And then I went to graduate school for social work, actually. And as a grounding practice in my art, and to keep myself drawing, I committed myself to doing a daily drawing. This was in 2007, January 2007. I was like, I'm going to do a daily drawing as a meditation for peace, and just a little drawing in a single color of pink, bright colors.
I love that. Wow.
Yeah. And they were little mandalas. And so I started doing that. And I got bored, like with what I was creating out of my conscious mind around, I don't know, maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months. I'm not actually sure when it happened at this point. But I got bored with what I was creating. I felt like I was sort of decorating. I always knew that I wanted to be creating, and I've been obsessed with pattern and geometries all my life, but had been really making them in these sort of mandala forms for a few years at that point. And I felt like I was sort of decorating things or like coming up with the same forms over and over. And so I was like, I already know how to talk to my soul using energy testing. Why don't I just ask my soul how to make this drawing? Like I'm going to do a year of these. I'm getting bored already. Yeah. And so, wow, when I did, I was just blown away. Like all of a sudden I was able to get to the depth, right? That was I knew that pattern and geometry held universal truth and could, and I was frustrated with my incapacity to bring that forward in a consistent way, right? Like it was 1 out of 5 was really felt deep and true.
For sure.
Once I collaborated with my soul, it was like everyone felt deep and true. I was like, oh my goodness, like this is what I'm doing the rest of my life.
There you go. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah. Wow. Is there more you want to share about that too?
Well, because
I didn't want to cut you off.
But no. Well, it's a multi-layer process because you asked about the guides and how I knew to connect to them. So I was just working with my soul for a number of years, from like 2007 to 2013. And I started my pieces on the ground and really so that I paint those in clay slip outside. And I was thinking about that as being in tune with the energy of the place and being an offering to the place and healing in that way. So I was already starting to work with intention in that way. But then I read the works of Michelle Smallwright, who is not an artist. She's a nature collaborator. And she has this process called a coning. And that's the process that I use to connect to the team of guides. And it was like the last piece that allowed me to connect to a broader team of guides, that gave me permission to not have to see or hear the guides, but just to ask to connect, know they're there. And really, I'm calling in a professional team. Yeah. I'm calling in the guides that are in charge of that sort of have their purview is what I'm trying to work on, right? So my intention steers who I'm connecting with. I have a core team of guides that I always work with because they work with pattern and geometry. I work with the overlighting deva of healing because all my patterns are healing. So so there's core guides that are always on my team. And then when I do a specific piece, I also call in other guides that are experts in that area. Wow. I don't have to know them or have a personal relationship. I just trust I'll energy test to get the right, phrasing for it, but I
Hmm.
just trust, like, they're there, they want to work with me because I'm doing this work, and we go. So
Wow.
yeah.
That's amazing. You know, I think a lot about what you're doing in terms of like healing, like land work, like doing it in a physical, like, trying to heal a certain place, because I do feel like certain places hold a certain energy signature based on their histories, right? And what happened in those places. I can think, for example, when you go to, like, I remember when I was in high school a long time ago, I went to Poland, and we went to Auschwitz, and we went to the concentration camp. And there was an undeniable feeling in that place. Now, some people might be like, oh, that's because of your how you're mentally attributing what you know about the horrific situation that happened there. But it was beyond that. It was palpable. It was like I could feel it on the surface of my skin. I could feel it in the way that my heart was beating, in the way that my breath was moving. It was it was a very deep spiritual experience. And so for some who have never been to that place, thinking about how could you go to a place that where the most horrific atrocities to humanity have been, taken out, like how could you say you had a spiritual experience? Well, I did, because of the connection to this greater level of energy of suffering that took place, that pointed me toward like what's beyond suffering. You know what I mean? And so like it to me it's obvious that like places, that's just an example for people out there of like how a place can hold an energy. And it can be very positive too, and it can be neutral as well. However, I also, when I think about the work you're doing, I also think about like indigenous art traditions and the kind of work that was done in the kind of indigenous art traditions we see around the world, where they're creating, earthworks and mandalas and creating these patterns in sort of certain ways in certain places. I think of like the Nazca's lines, or I think of like uh Serpent Mound, or I think of even I think of like sand mandalas in Tibetan Buddhism, or in Hinduism, like in Vedic tradition, like doing mandalas with colored rice and flowers, and you know what I mean, doing them on earth to kind of create this healing resonance, bringing this intentional conscious sort of feeling there. And even in like Native American cultures, like in the Hopi or the Navajo, like we see this in Aboriginal, like I can just keep going, like even in West African, indigenous history. So like my point is that there's a rich history of civilization, of people, and certain people within these indigenous cultures, within tribes, who are connected to the spiritual realms, shamans, so to speak, who can tap into these spaces and create these kinds of works for the sake of healing that space or healing the tribe. And so I look at what you're doing as sort of in this 21st century way, like connecting to that lineage of healing art. Have you ever thought of those histories in relation to like what you're doing, and like how do you sort of like center yourself or position yourself in relation to like the indigenous wisdom traditions on the planet, who kind of evoke this kind of practice in their way?
Yeah, there's two things I want to respond to. I- I'll answer that your last question first, but I want to bookmark sort of what you were saying about the Auschwitz and that place as well, um, and having a spiritual experience in a place like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing what you were saying about traditional cultures and indigenous culture traditions. I very much see myself in that's like there's like I feel like there's a two-part lineage that really like both through my conscious awareness and energetically has supported me in doing the work that I'm doing now.
Hmm.
Yeah, I grew up in Southeast Alaska, so I like on the land of the Tlingit people, and very much, like would walk through a park with totem poles, like carving almost every day,
Wow.
and saw dancing, and yeah, just saw that connection of the pattern to the land and people's like um wearing the patterns. And, I'm now in Seattle. And so like the people here there would be, the patterns are on your houses. Like the traditions in Southeast India of kolam, that painting on the ground. I found a book of that when I was in undergrad. Like it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Back when the internet wasn't really a thing, I
Yeah.
found a book
You go to
that
the
was
library,
really,
the Dewey
was
Decimal System.
yeah. I bought it at a bookstore. It was like on sale, and it was just like, oh, it was just like the beauty of it was just, that tradition of and that idea of painting prayers on the ground and offerings, like offerings of gratitude, like that really just resonated with me so much because I think because I grew up in these beautiful places, and walking out the driveway as a kid, I would just like feel this gratitude pouring out of me for like the land. They were like, it was my solace, like when there were hard things happening in my family, or like I was going through teenagerness, like the difficulty of that, I would just pour my heart out to the trees and like sing to them. And so there's always been this connection of like and resonance with the living systems around me. And I feel that, most easily around my plant friends,
Yeah.
and rock friends. And humans, I'm like, I can get there, but I really have to be in an open-hearted space.
Yeah. No, I
um,
hear you.
yeah. But so let's see. Yes, I definitely connected to traditional cultures, and very much feel like, so I think I'm getting diffused here, but what I want to say about that is that traditional cultures, I think, knew that patterns and geometries supported us in a multitude of ways, right? They supported spiritual connection. They supported, I think they literally supported our lives, like in ways like, like there's little like pattern amulets in Japan that they stitch on the back of children's clothing to protect them. There's all kinds of ways that patterns and the strength of those geometries and patterns can protect our lives. And, I think that they were used to increase fertility of our land, our bodies. I think, like they were utilized, right? And so for me, there's a little bit of grief that I feel in seeing sort of mass produced like textiles and patterns that really have no like purpose, like they're not, except to look nice, right? Like
Yep.
so we've relegated pattern and geometry to a realm of decorativeness, which it's, that is a wonderful thing that it does, right? It pleases our eyes. And I love how my patterns look that I'm working in, that I create in conscious collaboration with spirit. They please my eyes too, but they're also working at these deeper levels. And when I look at them, I can see it because they're surprising, right?
Yeah.
When I look at a pattern and I'm not surprised, I know it doesn't go very much deeper than just being fun to look at, right? When I look at it, and that's how there's sort of two lines of art ancestors that I have, like those indigenous traditions, the traditional cultures. And then I didn't know about them when I started creating my work, but Hilma af Klint and Emma Kunz, and like and other mystical sort of these other mostly women artists that started channeling and working in this way. I didn't know about their work until like 2015. I, started doing this in 2007, and then did the soul pattern portraits in 2014. When I found their work, I was like, oh my God, I saw it. And I was like, they're doing what I'm doing. And I can tell because the patterns and the geometries that they're creating are surprising. And then I read about their work and I was like, damn, they are doing what I'm doing. Oh my God. And like 100 years before me, that's so fantastic. Like they created energetic pathway that I was able to then pick up, and I can do it in connection with other people, right? Like they did it in isolation. Hardly anybody got to see their work. And when they did, like Rudolf Steiner went in and tried to change how Hilma af Klint was working because he wanted her to do what he was doing instead. Like like I'm so grateful that I'm working now where I can keep doing my work, I can tell people about it, and like there's resonance there instead of it being resistance, right?
Yep, exactly. There's a connection to like a history that people can be like on board with, even though like we said, this history is as ancient as it gets. But like when Hilma F. Klimt's show came up at the Guggenheim, it opened the door and opened people's minds to this kind of work in a way. Actually, I was talking about this on another episode with another artist too, because I think we're all see that. We saw that as like a almost like a crucial moment, like the beginning of a transformation in the art world that is going to be more and more open toward what we're talking about today. And this
Mhm.
is maybe an idealism in my mind, but I just see it like that was such, it had such impact on people that
Yeah.
there's no question. And artists have been working this way for a long time, but they've just been shut out of certain echelons and elitist sort of circles of art, But now it's like, I think those floodgates are going to start opening. And so it's a really amazing timing that we're here doing this kind of work, because I think this is it's what's coming. It's still the very beginning. It's percolating, but
Mhm.
that is sort of the little tear in the fabric, so to speak, was that show at the Guggenheim.
Yeah.
And now once there's that tear, it's just going to open, and it's all coming through. I think
Yeah.
that's really, really special, for you to bring that up to create. I felt the same way when I came across work, because I was doing this kind of work, for many years before that show. And then I saw it, I'm like, yes, like I just felt what she was doing, and that the fact that it had resonance was just really inspiring, for me. Um, yeah, it's good timing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, we are. I definitely believe that we are at a critical tipping point. And I think that the way, like working in collaboration with spirit, however that looks, like that can look an infinite number of ways. But like
Definitely.
it doesn't have to look like sacred geometry, right?
Yep. Hmm.
Um it you know we're an infinite we express like divinity in an infinite number of ways in humanity, right? And so there are going to be an infinite number of ways that that's going to come out as artwork.
Yep.
um, but I think that that quality of something feeling resonant and surprising, like the freshness of that. I mean, I actually wrote an article on Hilma of Klint and Emma Kunz, and talked about that fresh quality, like that comes from, the reason their work looks fresh today, and is because it's done in collaboration with spirit, and it's surprising, right? Like
Hmm.
in that way. And I think that there are several other artists working at the time who are also doing abstraction that I don't find their work as surprising. And Kandinsky's work is beautiful, but like I don't find it as surprising as I find Helma af Klint's. And
Yeah.
I think that's because he was working to portray the spiritual dimensions, but I think he was mediating that through his conscious mind, right?
Hmm.
And when we think about things, we kind of slow them down. So like that like it steps down the information. And Helmut Klint was like directly like
Boom.
had that direct connection. I was like, this is what, it's gonna do this, right? So yeah, there's something else that happens I think especially those first like big works, where it was just real direct.
It's interesting, what you're saying, in terms of a couple notes, like when you're talking about like certain qualities of patterns. Like I love, like you bring up this idea of it being surprising, and not something like other than like what you'd expect. And you brought up this idea of decoration, and it made me think of this time when I was in grad school and I was making a lot of work using pattern, doing a lot of intuitive patterning,
Mhm.
within very like known sacred geometrical images as well. And I remember some of my professors were just like, this is just decoration. Like, what are you know what I mean? And I was like, no, it's not decoration. Yes and no. I remember having this like whole thing. But I got a lot of resistance from certain professors that I had, because I was intentionally and consciously expressing my spirituality through my art and talking about spiritual ideas. And There's definitely a split camp when I was in grad school between some professors and others. Some were like on board with what I was doing and encouraging me, and others, I wouldn't say they were discouraging me. They were still lovely and amazing people. I still respect and appreciate them so much because, sometimes you need that tension to like kind of really reflect inward and really know what you're doing and where you're going. But there was a lot of resistance
Mhm.
to me and what I was doing. And I look back on now, it was a great thing because it's gotten me to where I am now. But I do also think about this idea of masculine and feminine energies, not necessarily in gender, but in like energetic qualities. And you mentioned Kandinsky, like kind of coming through the logical, rational mind, and then someone like Hilma, who was just purely intuiting and purely like uninhibited, flowing with the connection with the spirit. And it's interesting. A lot of the guests that I'm like connecting with, it's mostly majority women. Like I find doing this kind of work, or people who carry like who have this like real deep connection to that feminine, intuitive energy quality. Do you see that at all either? Like this sort of dichotomy of masculine, feminine, not in terms of gender, but in terms of like energetic qualities. Do you know what I'm kind of referring to? I'm wondering if that's making sense.
Um, I mean, I do think that most of the people that I know that are doing this work as well are women or, queer.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but I don't know if that's just because it's who I know or if it's, but yeah, I think, um, I do think that there's like that dichotomy, like that it's just decoration. Like that's part of that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there's been, and it's also like what Western culture has done, sort of colonialism has done to try to like, um, you know, lift up itself, with that ideal of like, white marble statues, Greek marble statues that, once were polychromed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But color was stripped away, like color is seen as too frivolous or feminine. It's all, it's like, and it's what's associated with develop, with countries that and cultures that were colonized.
Yeah.
They're, like pattern and color were like the realm of people that were trying, we were trying, like white folks were trying to like suppress and like take power from. So that, like that disowning of pattern and color, and are very much part of I didn't part of that when it comes to art, right? Like
Yeah.
art did that as well. That whole process of colonialization happened through artwork as well. And so it's been interesting actually when I started collaborating with my team of guides. I immediately, like my first collaborators that I called in were the Overlighting Deva of Healing and the Overlighting Deva of Sacred Geometry. It was a few years before I realized I left out the overlighting deva of color. Oh my God. And
Mm-hmm.
there was like this wave of grief that I had where I was like, oh my God, like this like I'm obviously working with color all the time,
Yes. Yeah.
but this huge wave of grief that, oh my God, I left out color. And like when I connected to the overlighting deva of color, there was like, I felt that deva's like a grief in being like ignored. And then
Yeah.
it was another couple years later before I realized, oh my God, I've left out the overlighting deva of pattern. And
Yeah.
it was like in that level, right? Like color was like more okay, right? And it's like that colonial mindset, like
Mm-hmm.
color is more acceptable than pattern.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was that journeying down into myself and like finding like what it was I really and owning what I really cared about, that allowed me to like fully collaborate with my full team and like express like that, have that freedom to express who I am and what I am and what I'll care about in the world. But yeah, it felt like my own little mini decolonial journey within my
Yeah.
process.
That's amazing.
Um,
I love that insight. And I think the insight around colonialism and it's no secret, heavily driven by the patriarchal sort of power structures, the dominant sort of masculine energy that ruled the planet, has still is ruling in some sense, the structures. It makes sense that like there's this sort of aversion to the more feminine qualities of culture, because domination is part of that signature, And I think and I think this stuff even transcends ideas of gender. I look at any human being, no matter how you identify yourself, you have masculine and feminine energies inside of you. And I see that the colonialist, patriarchal kind of like history that we can't deny has sort of tampered down the feminine in a lot of people, that energy inside, and bolstered the masculine energy. And that's what we see sort of reflected in our culture around like these notions of success being a hierarchical thing, better than others, winning sort of thing. You know what I'm getting at? And so I look at like kind of what's happening now is the feminine is coming back. The energy of the feminine is coming back to achieve balance again within the human heart of all beings, no matter again how you express or identify yourself. Like we have these two qualities in us, and both are important, and we need to cultivate both those energetic qualities. And so the work you're doing, what I'm interested in, what a lot of artists I'm connecting with are interested in, is sort of almost in a way is sort of awakening and bolstering the feminine back into balance with what has been so out of balance for, you could say, many centuries.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you in terms of what
Yeah.
you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a major transformation too, just within how we approach our connection as artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, and it's been within my lifetime that this feels palpable. From right now, it feels like that you're creating this podcast and you're reaching out to other people that are focusing on the spiritual and art, right? Concerning the spiritual and art, it's
Mm-hmm.
like that's and creating conversation and community between those people with the goal of all these other people. Like there's all of the people you're interviewing and then all the other people that will touch, and like feeling a connection to that. And like there's a generosity and openness to that, because this is the thing that you do and that you care about, but you're not saying I'm the star, like I have,
Mm-mm.
like I'm doing
Yeah.
this, I want everybody to look at me. You're like, I love this, and I'm going to shine this light all around me, right? Like
Yeah. That's what I
gonna
hope
bring it to
for sure.
everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's a big goal for me.
that's a huge transition, but that's a shift in how we're like, and how we are functioning. And I think that is a shift towards like the divine feminine and recognizing connection, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not about the one, it's about like we're going to do this, and we're going to do it together. Like this is,
Yes,
and everybody holds a piece of this beautiful puzzle that we're creating, right? Like
definitely.
everybody's, you're creating like a landscape where there's like this geometry and this connection and like this sort of this oniric dreamlike quality of space. Is like, yeah, they're wonderful, right? Like, and like it allows somebody to like imagine, like kind of feel that quality in the land around them, and then also like almost like imagine it, like as in
Mm-hmm.
a sunset or sunrise moment. Imagine one of your landscapes, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
overlaid over it, which is
yeah.
something I think about with my patterns often. Like when I do a pattern for a place, like imagining that pattern like over Mount Tahoma. Like
Yeah,
when I look at Mount Tahoma, I'm imagining Mount Tahoma's pattern over it, because it's like
yeah,
it it energizes that thing, right? Like it becomes like, once you create something, it's a reality that you can engage at any moment.
yeah. Gives you a new level to look at something,
Yeah.
it's like your photo manipulation. So, so like you do these like photo kind of collages with your patterns, like, and that's sort of almost like doing exactly what you're talking about, is giving someone like a different layer of how you might look at the same thing,
Yeah.
that because there is so much more happening than we can see with our eyes. We can
Yes.
feel it. We can
Yeah.
feel it, but like, how do we bring that feeling into crystallization of a form we can actually, see before us? And so I love those photos that you're doing too. There's so many layers to like what you're doing. But back to your point about like sort of like the democratization of like spirituality and art and the sharing, like to me, that is a huge hurdle we have to cross as a culture, is get out of this idea of a zero sum game that there's only one winner and
Yeah.
everybody else is a loser. You know,
Yeah.
it's like that is one of our biggest hurdles we have to get over. And that it's like, and I think about it in sort of the realm of art, right? There, in some realms there's a lot of ego egotism and competition within the art world with between artists. Like there's a competition to sell more or be shown more or do this and that, and I'm like, this is bullshit. Okay, like we are on a team trying to do something bigger than the material outputs that might happen. Yeah, those are nice. Like, yeah, I have a home, I have to pay for my bills, I have a kid, I have a kid on the way. Like, I did get it. I have material responsibilities. Of course, there needs to be a level of balance there. But this idea of access and this idea of like bolstering the individual above all is something that needs to dissolve into dust because it is not serving us. And so I take this project that I'm kind of beginning as like an opportunity to create that community, this connection between all these artists who might be working a little different, but we're all thinking and opening our heart in the same kind of way. And I have, various visions for what we could do with that sort of collectivization of voice and community. But at the very least, it's hopefully exposing people to the fact that like this is not something about an individual. This is about like this movement. It's a movement. And that's my goal, is to highlight this movement that I see where people are becoming more open to expressing their spirituality, their connection, being more open to being vulnerable in that through their art making. Because I think a lot of the way our culture was set up, previously didn't create that space for people to do it, and so I appreciate you picking up on that, and I want to reiterate, that, and I want you to hold me to that too, because the ego is so slippery, you know what I mean? And so it's a constant having a realignment of like intention,
Mhm.
to think about the bigger vision that includes all instead of
Mhm.
just one,
Mhm. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Well, I think it's a beautiful offering and intention that you've started out, and I think that I agree. Like there are a lot of dynamics that need to be healed in the art world, and it's not it's not it's like that's our land to work on, right? Like that's our what where we're grounded, but that's like it's really like we all are taking care of the where we're at, like
mhm.
if we all take responsibility where we're at and like heal those dynamics within our communities, that's our work. That's what we
Yeah,
have to do, right?
100%.
um, and I think that there's always, I'm going to bring this back to like a really long time ago, when I said there was something else I wanted to respond to, but I think there's always a healing gift that comes out of a like wherever there's some dynamic. And this is something I learned a long time ago when I was studying energy psychology, is when there's a trauma that's stuck in the body, um, you can dialogue with it and know its story and know why it's there, and then you, as it releases, when you do that intervention, there's this like a flood of energy comes, like there's been all this energy that you've been using to kind of keep that trauma in place, and when it's
Mhm.
released, there's all this energy that flows through you that's now available, that's no longer tied up in like containing this thing, like it takes a lot of energy to push down that pattern and color, to push down the feminine, to push down our connection to others. It takes a lot of energy in our collectively and in our bodies to do that. And when
Yeah.
we can heal that thing, when we can start releasing that and heal that thing, there's all this other energy that becomes available to us, that was, doing this other thing. And then there's a healing gift. There's like each time I dialogued with that part of the trauma, it has like this gift for us. And so when you went to Auschwitz and felt that like you had spiritual connection there, I'm sure that land is already in process of healing, right? Like the land is doing that work on its own.
Mhm.
Humans are doing that work with the land, and the more conscious work that we do to help the land heal, and to heal the human trauma that occurred there. Um, I think that's, like the reason you're able to have that kind of a spiritual experience is that that process is already in, it's in process, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't, I'm sure it's not done. Like that's
No,
why
for sure.
you felt like that weight on your skin of it, right? But there's also, I I am also sure that many people had realizations of what actually mattered in that place, right? Like there were so many people facing death who
Yeah.
died in that place
Yeah.
that also realized what the gift, even the gift of their life in that moment was, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you were tapping in to the like collective human consciousness and the ways that that was transformed in that moment where there was a
Yeah.
healing gift, even in the midst of like the most horrific thing that
Horrific thing. Yeah.
happened, right?
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense to me because, it really stayed with me for a while after I was there. Um, and I still contemplate it today, because it is such a meeting point of so many like extremes,
Mm,
the
yeah.
extreme potential of the human species to create suffering and violence. But even in the midst of that, like you said, like some of the stories you hear from people in concentration camps, like that have been passed down about the level of like compassion between people in there, like the sacrifice, the level of love, the level of selflessness that came about within people's hearts in these most horrific moments of suffering. They're willing to give their last piece of food to someone else who is
Mhm,
suffering more or who needed it more and willing to take that on. You know what I mean? That kind of energy is there too. The
mhm,
energy of the human spirit to never lose its center for compassion and love
mhm,
for others and its connection to, the universal soul within all, to me creates that signature there as well. There's so many competing things happening there. And I think that's what gives it such a heightened, palpable feeling when you're there.
yeah,
That's why lots of people are very emotional or crying because of the sorrow of it. And I've definitely felt that too. But I felt so many things.
yeah,
And so like that space, because it's now become a sort of memorialized in its museum like structure because people are visiting it all the time, recounting, reliving the atrocities there in the story in a way that is helping the healing because it's connecting us to like you said, like what matters most and like how do we how do we get to a point in our humanity and our culture where we are no longer treating each other this way.
mhm,
And sadly, we can see right now on the world stage and various examples that we are still stuck in this notion of separateness and this notion of like ego inflation and even the pathologies of the collective consciousness are still running the show in certain parts of the world. And um, I don't know, we have to heal.
yeah,
And so that all being said, like to your point, like it seems like a big task and it can be overwhelmed by the enormity of that task, but all big tasks are taken down one step at a time, one person at a time, one choice at a time. The
mhm,
choice for love and compassion over selfishness,
mhm,
that adds up. And so I think each of us, not only as artists but any human out there whose ears are open and listening to this conversation, like each of us has a role to play in healing, even if our gift is not necessarily in art making, but we have to be able to bring that to the forefront of our intention and the way we live our life. And we look to people like yourself to lead the way by example, so that you can show an example of a different way of living on this planet, a different way of connecting with the life of this planet, like the idea of connecting to a rock and asking its permission to paint on it. The level of consciousness and awareness to even have that thought cross your mind to ask is something that just changes the whole game of what consciousness is and what it is to be alive and connected in this place. And so I see the solution being this critical mass we have to achieve where people
mhm,
are waking up. And I see, again, I have such a limitation on what I can see, but I hope and I feel like I'm seeing an awakening happening, a huge wave happening. And I'm hoping that can tip the scale for us in a time where we need it the most, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I've been kind of waiting for these changes that are happening right now. Since I was in high school, I read some prophetic works in high school, the Starseed, the Third Millennium, and Return of the Bird Tribes. Kim Carey's work. They were given to me by a kind of a friend and mentor, an adult who thought I would enjoy them, and I did very much. So there, I've had this knowing in my mind that things were going to change in a big way at some point, in the future, around, kind of after 2012, sometime, right? And and it took a little longer than we thought it was going to for those big changes to happen, and it looks different than I could ever imagine. But like, I think my healing, my perspective as a healer, like that grounding, is that all these waves of hurt and trauma and separation that are coming up, like, all this sort of polarity that's like exaggerated polarity. And you were talking about that with Auschwitz too, like that exaggeration of like the opposites between that. There's a dynamic, like those are dynamics that are coming up to the surface to be worked through and healed, and it's not going to look pretty, right? Like it's not going to feel it's not going to feel good, and it's not going to look pretty. When I did the healing work, the guided self-healing work, what you have to do to actually like heal a trauma is you amplify the sensation, and you dialogue with that sensation directly, like so. And you ask it what its story is, right? Like, so there's a part of this where it's like we are experiencing the amplification right now, right? Like those symptoms are being amplified so that we collectively can own those dynamics and look at them and understand, like, what part of this do I own? Where do I do this in my life, whether it's to myself or to others? Like, how do I recognize this pattern that feels so disgusting to me? Like when I see it played out here, it just makes me cringe. But where is it that I do that inside my own body, and then healing that aspect, right? Like that's like they talk about like that personal healing has to come first. It's because you have to do that part that you own, right? That part that you're contributing to this communal dynamic.
Mm.
And then you can like, it's like, what part about what's inside of me, and then I do this, like these energy forms, and there's this labradorite net or web that connects all of us to each other, and I dedicate like those parts that are those things, those dynamics I'm working with. I work with it inside, and then I dedicate it out to all the beings that can receive this healing, or that are working with this same thing. And it's like that net connects all the beings that are working to bring forward the divine feminine on earth at this time, through all times, levels, and dimensions. It's like there's anyway. So yes, there's this there's all these waves of pain and trauma that are rising, and we really, it's time for us to like take a assessment of what part of it is ours, to do that work, and to and I think like there's points of connection then, right? Like people are we're connected through our hard experiences also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're all experiencing this, we're all like working through this hard stuff, and then like there's that healing gift that's coming up through that as well.
Yeah.
So
That's such a good point to think about, like how to do the work for ourselves. Like a lot of times, like when we're judging, when we're like pointing something out that we see that we don't like, that's causing us to have like a reactive response, a negative response, in like a way that like it informs like our actions to be negative. That is a sign we have to look inside ourselves, and that means those seeds of that negativity, of that particular kind of energy, is still there, and we have to work on that. It's like what we react to out there is a reflection of what we're still working on inside, and so we look at certain figures in culture who kind of like are holding the signature of like the shadow, of the collective unconscious. And like, we're like pointing fingers and want to throw things. We want to inflict violence on these individuals who are kind of embodying the shadow consciousness. But what we really need to do is turn inside and see those qualities in ourselves and heal those. I think that's what you're trying to say. And I can totally relate to that, because we all are imperfect, and we all play this game of like kind of shadows and mirrors with ourselves on the deepest level. It's easy to trick ourselves into thinking we're somewhere we're not. You know what I mean? And that's where like the deep work needs to happen. Um, and so it begins by just humility, just recognizing, hey, I got some work to do, and it's okay, and we can work through it. Yeah, I don't know. It's hard though. It's really hard. I find myself, I've been on this journey of like healing and sort of, I guess, awakening, you could say, to like my deeper connection to spirit, to consciousness, to the universe, however we want to like articulate it. And it's, at first, it's like this feeling of like just love and light all around everywhere. But then you start to trick yourself, and eventually you have to do that hard work where you have to excavate the mud, the shit, and you got to heal that too. And you got to recognize it. And I think of Carl Jung a lot in his work in relation to like working with the shadow and the collective unconscious by working with our own consciousness. And it's something that I try to work on a lot, to recognize my own imperfection and where I still need healing to be done, no matter how enlightened I might tell myself I might feel or am, there's a lot of work to be done. I think that humility is really important in the healing path.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think one thing a theme that's come up with me recently, I just completed a work called Receiving Love. That's not the full title, but that's the main part of the intention. And the piece was mirrored, like there were two sides of it. And that was really interesting to me because that bilateral symmetry doesn't happen a lot in my work.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually radial or not symmetrical.
Yeah.
But it happens sometimes. And it was very distinctly mirrored, and then it made a face, and I was like, oh, that's really unsettling, because I don't it's like I'm not in the business of making faces. So like bilateral symmetry often just like goes to, you can't not see a face in it, right?
Yeah.
But it was so interesting, and a bunch of themes came up within it. But the thing, I had this realization after making the piece and after writing a reflection on it and having a friend write a reflection on it, was that so duality has been with us, and we think of like it's like this wound, right? Of this wound of duality that's been with us since we individuated from source, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you become, there's two, like all like the proton and the electron, like there's
Mm-hmm.
two, like there's these
Yep.
positive and negative, right? So it's baked in. And I was like, but I had this moment, I was pruning off some hellebore leaves. I'm a plant geek also. And like, because you need to like take off the old leaves before the flowers come out in the early spring or late winter. And I was pruning them off, and I realized I felt like I was addressing them like they were a problem. And I was like, oh, like I just finished this work on receiving love. And I was like, oh, like they're not a problem. I just need to receive the love of this moment. And there's a lot of background work that goes into this, but I was like, oh, okay. So then and then in that moment, I just saw it. I was like, oh, this whole duality thing, it was always about having the opportunity to receive love, and this infinity loop of like reciprocal, like joyful, loving, like giving and receiving love that goes back and forth between two poles. Like that's what it's about. It was about the opportunity to build energy between things, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
like there's an infinite number of like variations in the world that I can receive love from. And it's really just like that, like there's this mantra of like, this too is for me, like that really helps me open my heart. That's from a wonderful woman named Leah Garza. And that really has helped me, like, just as I'm walking or I'm doing things, like, this too is for me. I see something
Yeah.
and it allows me to fully open my heart to that thing and receive the love of it. Even if it's something that causes friction, right?
Yeah.
Like, I had this conversation with my partner the other day, and I was like, I was getting defensive, and I was like, "Oh, like, I need to, like, receive the love of this moment. Like, he's looking out for me right now. He's
Yes.
trying to look out for this thing, and I just need to receive that love instead of, like, defending against this thing that I think he's telling me not to do something, right?"
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it really, like that has, I feel like that's like, that's like, so I'm going to do this collaboration with soul for the rest of my life. And that feels like my spiritual work for the rest of my life. I'm like,
Yes.
oh, wow. This is not like the healing the wound of non-duality is really about just receiving the love that's
Yeah.
coming from whatever is outside of myself. Right. And
Yeah.
when I do that, like, it changes everything.
Yes. This idea of like acceptance and surrender, of letting go, trying to control your ideas of some outcome and to trust in the benevolent energy force of life,
Mhm.
that it's guiding you even in the negativity, that it's serving you, like the old saying, like no mud, no lotus, like we need those polarities in order to manifest. Otherwise, we would be in pure consciousness all the time. And I think we're here in dualistic form, manifesting separate from the one to play out a deeper sort of story that
Yeah.
ultimately raises the vibration of the collective. You know what I mean? And
Yeah, we
within
create
that,
possibility.
yeah, and that's what makes it interesting and fun in life. What it is that we can live it. And so I think finding this acceptance and this sense of purpose within the dualistic frameworks is crucial, while at the same time not losing sight or connection with the inherent unity of these dualistic frameworks. Like I'll often think of like the idea of like just a quarter. There's a heads and a tails, but it's a quarter.
Mhm,
Yes, it has two sides, but it's
mhm,
one thing. And so
mhm.
being able to hold these two levels of consciousness, I think it can be challenging when we try to over intellectualize it. But what you're saying is more about surrendering to the feeling of it and trusting in the loving awareness that is emanating from you and the loving energy that is coming toward you in all the things you experience. Like that starts to make a change in the way you move through the landscape,
Yeah,
because you can kind of hold these two competing notions, duality, non-duality, together. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
embody it. It's beautiful. That's what makes life worth living, in my opinion. Like if it was all perfect and easy and smooth, like what would we be doing here? So there's work to be done. And I think that's why what gets me up in the morning is to try to hold the center that I can, and hopefully expand that circumference by connecting with others. You know
mhm.
what I mean? And it's that connection that expands the whole picture to impacting everybody,
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Well, I really appreciate you and the work you're doing. And this has been amazing. I feel like we could just keep talking forever about these ideas because we're in total resonance with them. And I think it also is really like, I can't wait to look back through your work after talking to you and really like looking at it with all of these ideas in mind, even though I had the kernels and seeds of those ideas, but hearing you speak to them has been really just inspiring for me and really reaffirming for me. And I'm grateful that our paths have crossed and we've been able to share space like this. And I really hope that we can continue to do that in various ways, whether through the virtual space and maybe one day in the 3D realm,
Yeah, absolutely. I'd
we
love to connect again.
yeah, definitely. So I just want to thank you so much. And everybody out there, please check out Leah's work. There's going to be tons of stuff in the show notes, links to her website, her Instagram page, and any other thing you want me to add to that, you just tell me and we'll add it. So there's all sorts of information we can give to people so they can connect with you and the work
So,
that you're doing. So
yeah, absolutely. You can find me on at Planet Paint People on Instagram, and
cool.
that's my website too, is planetpaintpeople.com.
Awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I I can't wait to listen back through this episode because we went to a lot of amazing places and there's
Wow, we
just
did.
just amazing things that were shared. So thank you for sharing space and your time and your energy with me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin.
All right. Take care. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.